Hello and welcome. Today we're going to talk about how to structure the introduction for your PhD thesis. And the most important thing that I want you to know is you're not writing this thesis for your parents or for yourself or sometimes not even for your supervisor unless they're grading your PhD thesis. The real people you're writing your thesis for are the reviewers, and they need to be convinced that this thesis stands out, that it fills a gap, that it has a relevant contribution. 3 clients asked me this week how exactly to do that, and so I am going to break down the coaching that I gave them around how to write the perfect introduction. So the first thing that we need to know is that a thesis is not a crime novel, okay? So we're not waiting until the very end of the thesis to give away the most important contribution or to reveal who the murderer is, right? So we're not doing that. We are saying at the very beginning who the murderer is and why it matters, okay? So what is really important is that when a reviewer flips open your thesis, they understand the thesis's contribution from the first 1 to 3 pages. So these first few pages are the most important pages. So what does that look like in practice? In practice, what you want to do is you want to have the research question, your contribution, and the relevance of that contribution in the first few pages. So you can spend 1 or 2 paragraphs on a contextualization, right? So maybe there's a historical contextualization, maybe there's a political contextualization that's important. So make sure that you set up the scene for the reader in 1 or 2 paragraphs. This needs to be short and sweet. It just needs to include the most important elements for the reader to understand what's going on. Once you've done that, right, and it could also include a research gap, something that you found in the literature, right? Scholars have argued this, but what they haven't looked at is that. That's possible, but don't make a review out of it. So keep it short and sweet in the contextualization. And once you have that, you immediately turn to the research question or research puzzle of the thesis, right? So the research question of this thesis is, or in this thesis, I am investigating blah, or whatever, right? So you need to have a sentence that clearly lays out what this thesis is seeking to investigate or reveal. And once you have that, you can also, of course, say, so why is this question important? But once you've done that, you really need to say how you are answering that question, right? What is the answer to that question? We need to give it away immediately, okay? So don't wait for the conclusion of the thesis to do that. You need to do it in the introduction, right? Why is that so important? Because you need to put yourself into the shoes of a reviewer, right? The review goes out to some professor somewhere around the world, and they'll get a limited time frame to look at the thesis and grade it and read it and everything. So we want to front load that information because if they have little time, they're probably going to read the introduction of the thesis and they're going to read the conclusion. And that's about it, right? Maybe they're reading a few body chapters, maybe they're in a rush. Hopefully they're going to read the whole thing, but you never know, right? So make sure that the most important stuff is in the introduction so that if the reviewer would only read the introduction, they would know what's going on in the whole thesis. Okay, so we've got the contextualization, we've got the research question, and then we want to lay out the answer, right? How do we do that? We say something like, in this thesis, I argued that, and then you have 1 or 2 really succinct sentences about what you're doing in this thesis. And then you want to talk about the relevance of your intervention, right? So why is this even important? Why should we care? Why does it matter? Why should somebody be reading 200 to 300 pages of a dissertation, right? So you need to tell the reviewer or the reader why they should care. Why is this important, right? And the importance is certainly not, well, I am filling an important research gap. That's boring, right? You actually need to tell them why they should care in terms of your unique project. Good. And once you've done that, you can then turn to the other parts of the introduction, right? So you can do a little literature review, explain what kinds of theories or approaches you're going to use, right? A review, by the way, is never a summary of something. It's always a actual review, synthesization of your work and of other people's work. So you need to give your opinion, right, on these scholarly articles and books that you've read. After that, you can talk about your methods, right? Maybe you have your own methods chapter later on, then you just need to flag it, but you should be talking a little bit about the fieldwork that you've been doing, right? If you're a historian, what kinds of archives did you consult? What kinds of methods of analysis did you use? If you're an anthropologist, how many months did you go to the field? Where is the field, right? So where did you actually go to? With which people did you work? And once you've done that, maybe there's a couple of other things you want to sort of still put in the introduction, but don't forget that at the end of the introduction, you are going to need a chapter outline. You're going to need that because it gives the reviewer or reader a roadmap of what's going to come. And what's important here is that you don't go too much into detail, right? Like for each of the chapters, you should have maximum 1 to 2 paragraphs that explain what this chapter does, what the role of this chapter is for the thesis, and then the sort of progression of your thoughts alongside or across those chapters, right? So that the red line basically becomes visible. These are the most important points, I think, for the introduction. So don't forget, we need to front load the most important material. We need to reveal the murderer at the beginning. We need to make sure that readers understand our contribution, right? Because if they understand that contribution, they are going to be much more willing to view this with positive eyes, right? They're going to be in a much more sort of positive setup because they know why it's relevant, they know why they should read it, and you've given them a clear roadmap of what's to come in the thesis, right? So even if they pick and choose what to read later on, at least they know what to pick and choose, right? If you're just rambling in the introduction, it's going to give off a really bad image. And as we know, as always, first impressions count, and they count especially with the introduction of a thesis. So I hope this was helpful to you. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.